Good afternoon. I am today interviewing Ulrike Hinz, who is the Senior Policy Advisor on Climate and Energy at WWF Deutschland. And today I'm going to be asking a couple of questions in advance of Ulrike speaking at World Hydrogen Week. So the first question, if I may, could you please tell us a little bit more about your journey to becoming a Senior Policy Advisor on Climate and Energy at WWF Deutschland, and how your experience has prepared you to address the challenges of high-cost decarbonisation projects?
Yes, of course. Thank you very much for the invitation to this interview. So I guess I've always been interested in sustainability issues. I've focused in my studies and I did business and economics on sustainability a lot, and then started working at a startup and later a scale-up in electromobility. The scale-up was also acquired by Shell. And then I've done business development there, and later I also worked at a transmission system operator doing strategy and compiling the business plan. So I guess I've seen like a couple of things from the industry, and especially working in very capex and finance heavy organizations. That was really interesting to me. I also worked at a research institute for a while, and now I'm at the NGO for a couple of years. So I think for me, it was always important to kind of see the things from different perspectives as well and understand different stakeholder views. And taking all of this along, I've concentrated in the energy field for around 10 years now, starting with electromobility. I did a master's or MBA in energy management at Technical University Berlin. And I think, yeah, all of that gave me the necessary background and also the different views in the different organizations.
That sounds great, thank you. And from a sort of WWS perspective, what do you see as the sort of most significant challenges and opportunities with decarbonisation for carbon intensive and hard to abate sectors?
Yeah, if I may, I would like to start with the opportunities.
Sure.
Um, I think it's great that we achieved basically a common global agreement with the Paris Agreement already in 2016, that we really need to decarbonize or defossilize, which is sometimes more concrete, that we need to get out of fossil fuels. And I think it's really, really great that we have a lot of the technologies readily available already. We have a lot of the skill set, we have a lot of the knowledge. We know a lot about climate change, about technologies, about clean tech, about what we need to achieve in the future. And I think like we're mostly on the same page. What we need now is we need to implement it, so to get this going. And I think this is where the reality and also financing on this really kicks in, because it's very, very challenging to have this transformation, which is very huge and which is also global. I see a lot of opportunities for Germany, for example, in exporting clean technologies, and also other countries in becoming exporters of hydrogen, for example, which always needs to be on a fair scale as well. But yeah, I think we now are in a bit more difficult position and situation where we have wars going on, where we have inflation, where we have increased financing and increased risk and insecurity. And I think to tackle that, we really need to work together and not lose face in the overall transition that we need. And I think it's always good to keep in mind that climate change measures tomorrow would be more expensive than doing it today. And I think together we should achieve a bright future with this transition.
And so, third question would be, there is this ongoing debate about the role of hydrogen in decarbonisation efforts. And in your view, how do we balance the need for rapid deployment of hydrogen technologies with ensuring these investments are truly sustainable and aligned with long-term climate goals?
Yeah, that's a very good question. I think hydrogen does play an important role in decarbonization and defossilization efforts. It's not the only cornerstone or building block that we see there. So I think we also need to weigh the alternatives carefully and be careful that we take the most efficient or best solution at whatever industry we look at, basically. I think we should work towards a clear set of rules so that we have investment and planning security. I think a lot of European guidelines have already been formed. One of them is the Renewables Act and the RED II and the delegated acts within it. And I think there's a few rules of thumb. I mentioned efficiency already. So if you can electrify, because you don't have the losses when converting into hydrogen or derivatives. So I think if that's the case, then it's just more efficient, and we need a lot of electricity in the future, because green electricity, of course, helps us to decarbonize a lot of sectors and industrial processes, which is necessary. And I think only green hydrogen, so hydrogen from renewables, is truly sustainable in the long term. So we shouldn't rely on fossil fuels and fossil infrastructures for so much longer and have lock-ins that we then have to pay for in the future. I think that's really, yeah, really important to consider, to really put our state aid and state finance that we have into the long-term sustainable measures. Yeah, and so we need electrification, we need efficiency, and sometimes even sufficiency in a world with limited resources.
Great, thank you. And in terms of sort of the upcoming panel within the Innovate to Net Zero summit that you'll be joining, you'll be discussing how to lay out long-term benefits to justify high upfront costs. Can you give us a sort of preview of a key strategy you believe is crucial in establishing a strong value proposition for these investments?
Yeah, I think it's always important to really take into account the total cost of ownership. So meaning that you would look at the benefits over the whole life cycle of a project or an investment. So not only taking the initial CapEx investments into account, but also the OpEx investment. And initially ensuring that both the project or also like the strategic direction of the business that you're steering at is compatible with long-term goals and can basically de-risk on increasing carbon prices, for example, or increasing regulations, which will make it more difficult for fossil fuel infrastructures to prevail in the future. So I think long-term business fit is a very good strategy to look at. And there's also, like, of course, the tendency to divest in fossil fuel infrastructure. So we're seeing a couple of banks or insurances like AXA, Allianz, etc., and divesting in coal infrastructure, for example. So that really gives a good outlay of what these companies believe in would be sustainable for the future. And I would probably advise projects and businesses to go for the long-term sustainable future measures.
Yeah. No, that's great. Thank you. In terms of, well, I suppose as a representative of WWF, how do you ensure that high investment decarbonisation projects, particularly in hydrogen, align with the sort of broader environmental and sustainability goals?
Yeah, very good question. I think a couple of like roadblocks that we need, or like directions that we need, has already been formed. Especially, I already mentioned the RED II and the delegated acts and the additionality or electrification criteria. But when we look at the global scope of hydrogen projects, and I think there's going to be a couple of trade, a bit of international trade going on, which I think is also a great chance for international collaboration. And looking at these projects, it's really important, I think, to also take other sustainable goals into account. So basically look at SDGs as sustainable development goals again, and taking environmental, social, and governmental criteria also into account. So how do you want a project to be set up? Is there local value creation for the region where the project is being built? So does it really feed in capacity building for these people as well? Is it, for example, giving better infrastructure, better access to energy or water, or like whatever resources are crucial there? Because oftentimes, of course, the project regions would also be in very arid, so very sun intense project regions. So I think it's good to ensure that the project benefits to everybody involved, also local legislation. And I think that's super important to talk about this in regulatory terms as well. There's the voluntary schemes of the European Union, of the European Commission, and also a couple of other initiatives such as the Criterion H2 Global, or also the Green Hydrogen Organization. So a couple of initiatives are already looking in this direction already.
The last question, if I may, sort of looking ahead, what developments in technology, policy, or finance do you think will have the most significant impact on our ability to justify and manage high investments in decarbonisation projects?
Yeah, That's a very broad, that's a very good question and very difficult to answer.
Yes.
But looking at the current state that we're in, we're a bit of like coming out of the hype phase that we've had for 10 years, going into the reality where we see projects are being scrapped, projects are being discontinued because now we're seeing reality. And also, as I said, like the challenges are bigger now than they were like 5 or 7 years ago. So I think it's really a combination of ensuring that the production side, the transport side, and the demand side will work hand in hand, and you give more security to all of the stakeholders involved in this process. And I think that instruments such as H2 Global, also the European Hydrogen Bank, CCFDs that kind of like try to match the price gap or the price and cost gap between willingness to pay and the actual cost of the product, would make sense to really invest in the future. Yeah, so I think it's a combination of different things. And also what even the Oxford Institute of Energy said, it's rather a development right now which is driven by government subsidies, so by the government as well, than purely by the market, because the market is in a very early stage. So now the government and all of these instruments really play a crucial role.
That's great. Thank you so much. I really appreciate your time today and for doing this interview with us.
Thank you very much. Looking forward to that.